Today's installment of things I wished had known when I started watercolor. I want to talk about paper. And I've divided this very long video into sections. So if you just want to see a particular one, you can fast forward. We're going to talk about the formats to buy paper, like pads and blocks and sheets, a section on storing watercolor paper sheets if you don't have big drawers like I do, the cheapest watercolor sketchbook, surface types like hot press, cold press, etc., in a couple of brands, paper performance, and you're going to see this painting on a bunch of different papers. And I'm going to go from most expensive to least expensive and show you the differences. And then at the very end, my recommendations. So let's get started with all of that. Just get a beverage, sit down and hang out with me, okay? I'm Sandy Allnock, and I began painting in 2015, and I didn't know bupkis. And I know a lot more now in 2026 while I'm making this video. So let's talk about the formats for buying paper. You can buy pads, and that's what a lot of people will start with. That's what I started with. And I bought every pad known to man in every brand and every type because I wanted to test them all out. And I wish I had known that I didn't need to buy pads necessarily. They're all glued at the top usually. Sometimes you'll have glue down the side, but typically they are top glued or taped. They call it different things. But there are countless brands, countless types of paper each one of them sells, and you can get less expensive or more expensive, but almost all of them are 140 pound. And that's the recommendation I have for weight on paper. There is a 300 pound, which is like so stiff you could like whack your dog on the head with it, but don't do that. But it is heavier. It also comes in blocks. Now, blocks are sealed around the outside edges, which means you don't need to have 300 pound paper. You also don't need to tape it down because it's already secured. So you paint with them already in this block and you leave them in it. And then you have to find the opening so you can stick your finger in there and then pull out the piece. The ones from Arch or Arches, depending on how you want to say it, has a black edge to it, a black adhesive, and comes apart really nicely. This one is bao hung, and it is much more difficult to get off. I just struggle with it every single time. It's like really cheap glue, but it's also cheaper paper. So, once you get it started, it's usually not too bad. But it depends on whether you like blocks. Blocks in general are going to be more expensive than pads. But if you get one of these bao hung ones and you have as much trouble as I do with the glue, I just cut off the excess because basically it leaves that excess glue behind and you end up with this like strip of gooiness, and on your next painting, that's going to collect paint. So I just take a knife, a very sharp knife, and go along the edge and just slice it off. But I'm kind of trying to make the angle so that I'm not going to cut the paper. And especially when you take off anything from a block, don't stick anything in there that's going to scrape the surface of the paper because you could wreck the next sheet. So if you shove some scissors in there to try to open it up, that's why I'm not a big fan of blocks, just because that part is a pain. But of course I have a bunch of blocks and I still have to use them, so you will see them on this channel. But my preferred way to buy paper is to buy sheets. And I order it in large groups of sheets at once. And typically I use the Arch, Arches. Some people say Arches, and I have said Arches for years and have been corrected repeatedly. I know that it's Arch, but if I say that, then everybody's going to go, what are you saying? What is that word? Because most of my audience speaks English. So I will probably just refer to it as Arches so that you know what I'm talking about. But what I do is keep these in a big drawer. I have those big flat files that they used to have in art school. I found some when an art store closed. So that's a good thing to look for if you have an art store that's sadly going to go out of business. But if you don't have that to store big sheets of paper in, then I recommend doing what I'm doing, which is fold it back and forth across the center and just cut it in half. Basically, you don't have to use a knife. You can just tear it. You'll get that nice deckled edge. Pull it sideways not up. If you pull it up, you could rip it. And then you'll end up with 2 half sheets, and then you can cut those down further. And I typically paint on quarter sheets. So I only do, the cutting in half and then cutting each one of those in half. But if you do smaller paintings, you can cut it even smaller, or you can just cut it into a size that fits in whatever storage you have in your workspace. And it's going to be cheaper than purchasing pads when you're talking about per square inch of painting paper. So I highly recommend that. The Arche is the most expensive of the watercolor papers you're going to see here. It's, I think, at the time I'm filming this, it's just under $10. It's like $9.75. The Saunders Waterford that I'll be showing is $5.09 for the not so white one and $7.52 for the high white. And then we've got some other lower priced ones past that. So watercolor paper is not cheap. I get that. And we're going to be talking about some ways to handle that in addition to just buying it in sheets. So the cheapest good watercolor sketchbook, people are always asking me, what sketchbook should I get? Well, if you want good stuff that's going to help you learn to paint larger. I mean, if you're just going to do a nature journaling sketchbook, you could do with all kinds of smaller type of watercolor sketchbooks, because you're not doing big floods of color and needing to have techniques work out and all that sort of thing. So get yourself a sheet of 22 by 30, a full sheet of watercolor paper. You can get one at your local store. Your local art store usually sells individual sheets. And you can get some good paper, like I said, $10 for a sheet of paper, and you can make your own sketchbook out of a $10 sheet of paper. Now, why don't companies make sketchbooks out of good paper? Well, it's because then they'd have to buy all that paper, and then they'd have to charge us for it, and they'd be sitting there cutting it, and just all of that handling is expensive. And for each one of these sketchbooks that they make, they're going to charge a premium for it. And then you're going to say, well, why is it so expensive? Because it's good paper. So you can make your own. And what I'm doing here is folding it in fourths horizontally and fourths vertically first. And, you can fold it back and forth once or twice. You don't want this to be so creased that it will tear when you're using it. You don't want it to be like super bone folder type of sharp. And also when you're doing any paper folding, when you're handling your paper, whether it's in a pad or big sheets like this, wash your hands really well. Some people will use gloves. I prefer to just really wash my hands well, make sure I have no oil, no skin oils or anything, no dirt. So once you have this sheet divided into fourths, both horizontally and vertically, you'll take the first column, a long column, and you'll just tear it down that long column 3 blocks worth, because you got 4 blocks each way. So you're going to do 3 of them. And you're going to leave that last one hanging on. Okay? And then you're going to flip it, and you're going to have the center torn the same way. You're going to go 3 of the rectangles, 3 of those pages. And you're going to tear that one down. Again, you're going to be pulling sideways. Just do it gently. Take your time. No rush on this. And leave that last one attached. And then you'll flip it one more time. And you'll do the same thing with the next one. So you're basically making a continuous sheet that you can fold up. It's a big M or a big W if you're laying it out. And if you do this on your dining room table and cut up some other sheets that you want to paint on as well, you can do a lot of work with a couple sheets of paper and turn this one into a sketchbook that has good paper. And you can get as good as you want. If you want to make cheap paper and, make a cheaper sketchbook, you can do that. But even if your store charges, and, stores will sometimes charge more than you can get it online, even if they charge $12, like that's a good sketchbook for $12. So you can put a cover on it, that sort of thing. There are some weird little pocket things that'll happen with this, but I'll show you a sketchbook that I've made, because I've used this format in some of my classes, because it's inexpensive and you can do a lot in it. There are some sketchbooks that have good paper in them, and there are some places that will make a handmade sketchbook, that sort of thing. But this is one of the books for the watercolor jumpstart, so it's for my beginners, and one side of it is all color theory and that sort of thing. You can see one of the little hidden panels there that you can tuck something into. We work on color wheels. We test all our colors. We look for how to build more colors out of the colors we have in our palette, whatever your palette is. And there's one of the hidden panels filled with more color testing. And then you keep flipping it. It's like an eternal, continual sketchbook. And on the other side, the other half of class is techniques. So we talk about, how to get the water to move, how to do dry brush, how to do a lot of different things using a spray bottle, adding details, painting flowers, just lots of different techniques. And it's a great way to start your watercolor journey, but it's also a great way to just use this kind of sketchbook. But you can do anything you want in it, just make one for yourself. So it's a pretty cool, very simple way to make a sketchbook. Now, surface types. If you're new to watercolor, you'll see hot press and cold press and rough, and what does all that mean? Well, the Arche, they have label colors that they use. The rough is the roughest, and it helps the color move across the paper because it has those rivulets in it. The fine grain is a little more in the middle, and I like both of those quite a bit. The way that the color moves across it is beautiful. They also have a hot press that's very flat. I don't like that one myself so much, but some people swear by it. So you could certainly try some out and see what you like best, because it's all about what you like. It's not about what I like. Then there's other types of watercolor paper too, and they're not ones that I necessarily am recommending. I just wanted to show you some of them. This Canson XL watercolor paper. They're both 140 pound, and some brands will say that it's 100% cotton, because you want 100% cotton paper. But I have my doubts about some of the cheaper ones because they're so inexpensive, and they also don't perform all that well. And we are going to do some performance tests in this video. So let's look at what the surfaces of these papers look like. This is Arche's cold press, or Arche cold press, and it has a texture to it. And it also has, we have the option of having natural white or bright white. Now, right now, those are both priced the same. Saunders Waterford charges more for a brighter white paper. These two are mostly alike, though. I can hardly tell the difference if I didn't have them labeled in my drawer. This is Saunders Waterford Cold Press, and Saunders has an interesting texture to it, and it's one that I'm not a super big fan of. That's why I like the Arches better than the Saunders, but I still paint with it. I still have some because it's not expensive. But look at the rough. The rough has really interesting texture. It's kind of more almost machine-like, but having the texture in the paper is what helps that color to move. And it does get you some interesting movement. But this is the difference between the white versus the high white. The regular white, if you buy it at Blick, the price I quoted earlier, $509 for the regular white, and the high white is $752. So it's like another $250 a sheet for the really white. But if you don't see it next to something else, you don't really know that it's not super white. This is the Bao Hong cold press, and it only comes in blocks. Again, one of the reasons I'm not a fan of it, because I don't enjoy blocks. I'm trying to use all mine up and that sort of thing. But there's that one. This is Strathmore cold press, and I probably should say cold press in quotes, because it just doesn't feel very cold pressy. Nor does the Canson cold press, the Canson XL. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those when we do the paintings on those papers, because they're both really cheap student papers. And a lot of people want to get cheap student papers because they don't think they're worth putting more money into. But, It's all up to how fast you want to learn, because if you get good paper, you're going to get better results and you're going to be happier and you're going to start learning the techniques that you need for a good painting, as opposed to what you have to do to overcome some of the paper's problems. But I'm going to go through first a full painting of this scene. So I'm using one color on this. It's going to be Daniel Smith's Lunar Blue, because it has a really good broad range of values. And I'm just going to paint the sky first. I'm reserving the whites on two places, one on that far away wing and one at the top of the head. But I'm painting water elsewhere. Now you have to have a paper good enough that's going to hold that water while you're getting your paint mixed and while you're doing the painting. Some cheaper papers are going to dry so fast that you don't have time to get the paint on the paper, and then you're not going to end up with any kind of decent edges on them. Now, what I did there just now was to put a little container. I just have a little container for some of my art supplies sitting around in my drawer, and I just grab one of them and shove it under so that I get some movement on the paper. This is where the texture comes in. And on this cold pressed paper, it just does a nice job of moving, because you see, I'm not carefully painting clouds, carefully painting sky. I'm just throwing some color in random places and letting it do what it's going to do. And you get some really interesting soft edges that just kind of move to make a sky. You can use a small brush to do the details. I use a big Mottler brush. I use that a ton. It's one of my favorites. I am going to have a video on brushes coming up, so hang tight for that. But I'm going to also use a number 4 round brush to paint the bird. But what I've done here is something that I talked about in the clock painting that I did recently, which is reserving those whites. And what I'm doing here is feeling the paper to see if it's all completely dry. I waited till it was probably close to dry, but if you run your hand across it, you'll feel if there are kind of lumps in the paper. And if it's kind of a little bit buckled, then often it's because it's not dry yet, and you can heat that up. Some papers are so cheap that they just wrinkle all the time, and you'll never get those wrinkles out. The papers that I'll be showing you here, the Arches and the Saunders Waterford, they flatten out nicely. So as I said, just like in the clock painting, I'm avoiding getting any hard edges. Had I tried to paint around the bird with that background, then I would end up with a hard edge where the bird tries to butt up against the sky. But since the bird is going to be darker than the sky anyway, the only place I have to worry about not having paint on the background is where the bird's head is and where that little white highlight is in the far wing. So learning to just do even a minimal amount of negative painting on a painting like this really helps to be able to avoid some strange edges that you can get if you end up trying to paint two things that butt up against each other, because that's nearly impossible. I know there's probably people who can do it, but I think they are, I don't know, they're full of witchcraft if they can, because I have not been able to do it. But I'm using the same color, as I said, Lunar Blue, and it has a good range. It goes from really, really dark to, as you can see, really, really light. It also has beautiful granulation to it, and it's a new, well, I should say returning color in my palette. So last week I also talked about my palette and what colors are in it. This is one that I had in my palette for a long time, and I booted it because I was trying some other colors and I missed it. So I decided it was going to come back. So got the first pass done on the bird, the seagull, and then I can add a second pass once it's dry using really thick paint. Previously, I was using a thin wash of paint that I had mixed in that well in my palette. And here I can just start getting into some of the real details. I could have probably stood to go with a smaller brush because this is a small bird, but I decided I just wanted to use limited brushes and limited color because this is a paper test. It's not a painting test or anything. But adding in these darker layers. You can add in wet, more of the dark. I added some of that when I was doing the last pass, but I wanted to have a little more detail in them instead of just having um, all of it be blendy, because if it's wet, it's going to blend. And if you wait until the paper's dry, then you can be in control of just how much of the blending you get going. So when you see me reach for the water, that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to soften out some of the edge and then leave other edges hard and sharp. So peel the tape off of this one, and one painting's done. I painted this dang bird so many times for you because I wanted to, not only for your sake, so you could see this bird on different papers, but also so I could double check that I'm saying what I know to be true from this particular test. Because sometimes I have a mental notion of what I like and don't like in something, and I end up saying something, and then I have forgotten that I had opinions about something for particular reasons. So this is the rough version of the paper. Um, and it's natural white as opposed to the bright white. The last one was bright white. And if you hadn't known that, if I hadn't told you that, you would probably just think this is white paper. The only one that's included in this whole test that actually looks a little bit on the darker side is the Saunders, the really inexpensive one, the $5 sheets. Because of course we want white paper for our whites in our paintings, and that's going to cost, because that's how life goes. The tape that I use is white tape, and I know a lot of people will use a yellow tape or a blue tape or a green tape because it's cheap and you can get it at the hardware store. But I find that what that does is make my eyes play tricks on me. So I have that vision of that color surrounding my painting as opposed to white. And as soon as I take the tape off and move the painting somewhere else, it looks very different because it was against blue or it was against yellow or green, whatever color the tape was. So I like to have neutral surroundings around what I'm painting. It's one of the reasons that I also have started this practice of covering my desk in craft paper. That's a neutral color. It's not going to distract my eyes, and I can focus on the colors that I'm using. And that paper, I actually discovered that you could get it really cheap over at the hardware store, because you know what it is? It's construction uh, paper that they put out when they're doing various like roofing things and stuff. There's a red one, and then there's this craft one, and it's ridiculously cheap. So that's what I use there, and that's why I have it on my desk. I originally bought a big drafting table with uh, a black surface on it because I thought it looked kind of cool, but it's terrible for my eyes when I'm trying to view my paintings. So having something more in the middle is more helpful to me. So uh, the rough paper has given me some really soft edges in that background and made them blend really nicely, because those peaks and valleys in the paper are what move the paint. And if your paper doesn't have much texture in it, and when you're talking about any kind of student grade paper or those really cheaper papers, um, you're just not going to get that. It, you know, it's not going to make the color move, and you're going to be fighting that. So I will be painting on some, so we'll be able to see what that looks like. This is basically the difference between the natural versus the bright white. So if I hadn't told you that one was natural and the other was bright, you might not know that. And it also depends on how much paint is there, because I put water across the whole thing. So some of that could just be color there too. But I don't notice a huge difference when I'm painting between those two in that particular brand. But this is the Saunders Waterford Cold Press, and it's their regular white. Now you can see that this paper is a little bit on the ivory side of the color versus the tape. And like, that's the place you can tell that there's a difference. This is the cheaper of the good papers that I have to recommend. It's like 5 something for a sheet of this. But it depends on if you want really bright white or not. But it would be a good practice paper, because unless it's next to something super white, you wouldn't know. You would just start painting and have a great time. And you can get all the techniques just fine on this paper. So if you want something that's going to be more affordable. The other thing to remember about sheets of paper, especially if you buy at a place like Blick, which is where I get my paper, if you buy them in bulk. So I just save up. And if I end up doing a freelance project or something and I get a chunk of money, I will often just sink it into buying some paper and stash that away in my drawer. So that's a good practice to get into, to figure out what you want to buy in terms of growing in your art. If you need better paper in order to become a better painter, then figure out what that's going to take to start getting some better paper in your stash. And when you buy it in bulk, it also doesn't feel so precious. So if I screw a painting up, I don't feel so horrible because I only bought 1 sheet of it when I was at the local art store. So having a couple sheets at any given time in my stash really helps. But one of the things the Saunders Waterford paper does, that it doesn't make it my favorite brand, is that a lot of the blends get super soft. The sky here is ridiculously soft. It's gorgeous. But I'm also getting that same softness in the painting. So I would have to use more layers when painting on this paper so that I can get those fine details in the final layer, in order to get what I'm looking for and what I would get more quickly with the arches that I love. So, kind of depends on you. If you're more than happy to spend more time on more layers, this would be a great option. As I said, it's 5 something a sheet right now in the beginning of 2026. But all paper has been going up in price because, that's how the world is. But you can always ask for paper from Santa Claus, from your family for birthdays and Christmas and all that sort of thing. But your paper is there to be used. It's not there to be thought of as precious and be too afraid to paint with it. So just paint with it. Just get busy painting. Don't wait until you're good enough. Just get busy painting, because it is it's the only way you're going to get better, is to just paint. And if it takes, making a small sketchbook like I showed you how to make, so that you can practice, getting a wash across a decent area. If you paint everything in a little 4x5, and then you decide that you really want to paint something for your daughter or your grandchild for their wedding or something, and you want to paint something frameable, but you've only painted teeny tiny, super itty bitty sketches, then when you get to the point where, okay, now I've got to paint, the person's first house they bought, or I've got to paint their dog who passed away, or whatever the occasion is for that gift that you want to give them from your heart, it's going to be terrifying to work on a larger piece of paper. So my recommendation is just to get the best you can, get the best you can afford, and always keep an eye out for sales. My local art store even just has a newsletter they send out, and it tells me when paper's going to go on sale, and I make some budget for it if there's something that I need to get. So this rough is almost done. Again, it's, doing some nice blends, but it also is a little softer in the bird itself. So I would have to add a little bit more layers to get it to where I want it to be, but I don't want to keep us here forever on YouTube. I want you to go out there and do some painting too. So we're going to call this baby done for now. So I am now coming to the inexpensive papers section, which is probably where everybody fast forwarded to in this video, right? So there is one paper that is inexpensive that I can recommend, but I'm just going to caveat it. I don't know what the price comparison would be to another paper because this one seems to only come in blocks in the United States. The only place I can find to get sheets is from a store in Taiwan, and I have no idea what that would cost to ship to me, but I would love to get some of it, so it would be great. But I would like to do more testing with it to see. I think this is what they call coarse cold press, unless their coarse cold press is like way more coarse than this, because I do like the texture of it. There's a few things that I struggle with in it, and I have only had this one block of it, so I'm gauging this based on what I do know. The colors do a weird break thing. There's just some places in the paper where it's inconsistent, and I end up with strange lines that just appear. It's not like massive, but it's just little, I guess, impurities in the paper making that I don't seem to get with other brands of paper. So, as far as using it for, some of my bigger paintings, I may or may not ever end up doing that because I can't get sheets of it. And when you try to gauge the price of something that's in a block versus something that's in a pad or something in a sheet, it's not apples to apples because all blocks are way more expensive than the paper would be if it was in sheets or in pads. So there's that. But the paper performs pretty decently. And if you're looking for something to just help you get better and learn how to use good paper before you step up to something like Saunders or Arches, this could be a good option. But I noticed when I looked on a bunch of different sites, from Blick to Jerry's to Amazon, is that they have a ton of different covers and different types of things. Mine is the master's choice. And so I'm only speaking to that. A lot of theirs say that they are academy grade. That generally means student grade, and it's going to mean lesser quality paper. So I can't speak to what the texture of those papers is like, but I do know that this master's choice that I have is pretty decent. It will help you to learn how to make a big wash like this, and you'll get that kind of blend in the background, that sort of thing. But as I said, I don't know whether just the block that I have, it has its little inconsistent impurities, or if that's just an endemic thing, because it's an inexpensive paper, which often means then the companies, when they make it, will start to cut back on a little quality control stuff, which may not be a problem at all when it comes to practicing watercolor. And this may be like the perfect solution for you. And there's certainly not other great solutions in this inexpensive section, so I apologize for that. I have tried tons of papers over the years. Every time I see like a new paper, I'm gonna go try that. And I often end up with like something that now I'm going to have to figure out how to just use it up because it was something that I didn't like. So this one, yes, I did pull it off the block in order to have apples to apples sizes with all of my little paintings. So next is Strathmore, and I bought this pad of Strathmore. I think it was 11 by 15 pad because I was wanting to take it to take something cheaper because yes, I am as cost sensitive as anybody else. Wanted something cheaper to take for my figure drawing group. I wanted to be able to take watercolor, and I thought, oh, if I could get something cheap, and this was cheap, so I got it, and it was terrible to use for my figure painting. Not that I'm good at figure painting anyway, but it did not help to be fighting the paper. And the inexpensive papers, this is a student grade 300 series paper from Strathmore, and student grade papers are generally going to have lesser quality to them. And I mean, look at that brushstroke that I put down immediately. It moved, but then the top of it just kind of disappeared. The bottom feathered out okay, but like each brushstroke did another weird thing. It just all acted strangely. And this is what I found when I was painting in my figure drawing group with it. really challenging. And I know that there are people who can paint on things like this. I am not one of them. And if you find somebody who loves this paper and you want to use this cheap paper, then please go follow them and find out what they do and learn from them. There are going to be techniques that will work great on even the worst papers, I guess. I just don't know what they are. But, you can see the difference in the sky. There's just some strange places that the blends go wacky. This particular color, Lunar Blue, does kind of burst into some light blue at certain points in its travel across the watercolor paper. But this paper has like these motions in the texture of it that whole background just kind of gets caught up in. It's just, I don't know what it is. It just won't travel particularly well. But I decided I wasn't going to abandon it. I'm going to finish this daggone bird because by the time I got to the end of painting this over and over again, I wasn't so bad at painting a flying seagull. It's just kind of a little meditative exercise to try to see if I could paint mostly the same thing over and over again. Typically, I don't do that. Once I paint something one time, I'm kind of done with it. I might paint it twice if I really, really, really want to do it. But on something like this, it was a little on the tedious side, and I suspect you are finding it a little bit tedious too. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit more so we can get through the next cheap paper, which is Canson XL. And Canson XL, just so you know, has a blue cover to it. And they have made what I think is a strategic error in their marketing by making the cover of their mixed media pads the same color. And they call it Canson XL Mixed Media. So make sure if you're going to get this that you get the watercolor paper, not the mixed media paper, because they're very different. They're not even just a little different, they're very, very different. But if you thought that the Strathmore was a challenge, just watch this one. The wash just gets really crazy and does not hold the paint. It's moving in weird ways, and it's got a lot of buckling going on. The buckling is what's creating those stripes because the paint is kind of traveling down the paper in those stripes. And I'm doing exactly what I did with the other papers. I'm doing the same technique, and I'm like trying to fix it, trying to add more color because it's all washing away. But the surface of it feels much more slick than any of the other papers. And usually when I'm testing out a paper, I'm checking a paper in a store, I ask them, is it okay if I touch it? Can I touch the paper, please? And I have to go wash my hands so I can go touch the paper because I want to see what it feels like. Canson XL, you can feel it's slick when you compare it to a good cotton paper. So you want a paper that has a little bit of drag to it. When it's too slick, it's just going to slide. That's what the color was doing here. It's just sliding across the paper. And there was nothing to grip onto for all of the color. And that is what happens with a lot of the student grade papers. So if you've been buying student grade or, like whatever they call it, academy grade in some places, then if you're having trouble with your results, that might be why. I would recommend just trying one pad of good paper at some point and see what that's like. And that will tell you whether or not it's the fault of the paper, because it might be the paper, not you, that's having problems. But even in painting this little bird, I was having the same kinds of issues. The paint was just kind of slipping around in strange ways that it didn't do in the other ones. And I found myself just trying to run around and fuss at it. It also had places where it would suddenly dry and get a hard edge. Now that all the paintings are done, we get to my recommendations and my unrecommendations. So these are my opinions. You can have your own opinions. All that you will like, totally fine. If you find somebody who knows how to use the paper you want to use, go learn from them. So the Canson XL for me is a big, hard no for sure. And we've already discussed that one. So let's go back to the second one that I don't recommend, which is the Strathmore. Again, a student grade paper. It's got weird breaks in the color, the way it lays down, and just doesn't behave the way I like my paper to behave. It's also got some strange angles to the texture in it. It just, blah. I wish that they would stop making all the student grade papers because the students are not learning on it either. I realize that it's cheaper, but goodness gracious. This one is the Bao Hung. And remember, this is the master's choice that I have. Other papers could have different features to them and that sort of thing, but you can see some of the places where there's just little spots that the texture of the paper did things to. Something in the fibers. Don't know what that is. Don't know how consistent it is across if you bought several pads of it. I have no idea if it's just this one that I got that's got funky things going on. But I think you can still learn from it and then be able to step up to a better paper later too. Next up is the Saunders cold press. This is the white. This is the darker of the colors that they sell. The one that's like $5.09. And it does do very nice blends. You can get a lot of that in the sky in the background. And in the bird, you can see that it almost feels over blended. But it's just that I didn't add on extra layers. I was trying to do apples to apples and do the same number of layers for each one of these paintings. And this one just needs more help. So then we come to the bright white. You can see the very clear difference. It's also a difference between this one is rough. The other one was the cold press. So you're seeing a lot of the texture as the breaks in the granulation happen. And it didn't do that really well on this particular paper. Sometimes granulation works best on particular types of paper, and maybe it's just on this particular brand it wants to be on the cold press instead of on the rough. So then we get to the papers that I do love, and that's my arches. And this is the two colors are kind of almost the same-ish. This is the natural white, the quote-unquote darker of the two. Nice blends. We don't have a lot of breaks. We have really smooth gradations, so you don't end up with real harsh drop-offs. You can force some of that with Lunar Blue. You can make it do other kinds of things, but I was trying to do something that I could try to make it do across all of these paintings, but I got more what felt like controllable detail in the seagull. And then again on this one, this is the bright white. You can kind of see the difference between them isn't vast, but there's a little bit there. So the price on them is the same between the two of them. So if you like one more than the other, then have at it. So that is kind of my recommendations. I just love the way Lunar Blue does this thing where it travels and changes and morphs. It's just a beautiful, beautiful color. So if that's one you want to add to your palette, then all the links to everything are in the doobly-doo. And there's also individual pictures of these paintings on my Substack if you want to study them further and see, oh, what did that grain look like with the paint on it? Go see that. I will see you guys later. Have a great week. I'll see you Saturday.